These will be available in a lot more detail, so I'm not going to dive into a ton of detail on every one of these options and what they all mean. And there are a lot better people to answer questions about that, and a lot of them in this room than I'm going to be able to. But each of these has some advantages and disadvantages as we look through. We ran through the evaluation. Our goal as a committee is we wanted to take a very complex problem, take the information that had been gathered, a lot of great information, and try to package it in a palatable way so that it's understandable. And so we tried to get rid of a lot of the clutter and make it as clear as possible so that we can then take this to the community and say, here's our problem, here's the options. You know, here's a suite of options. What do you think? How do we go about this? And so that's really what we've tried to do here with the packages. The evaluation results seem to indicate that 2 and 4 have a better value than the others based on the life cycle cost, and lower cycle cost per million gallons, and potentially lower environmental impacts. The problem with 2 and 4 is that neither really consistently produces sufficient water to meet the demand. I should temper that statement a little bit in that, you know, the demand forecast is an estimate. It could be a very conservative estimate, and so, you know, there's the possibility that that would, but with the number that we established, it doesn't quite get there. So alternative 2 seems to be a good alternative. Alternative 3 it costs more than alternative 2 and 4, but it can largely meet the demand over the 40-year horizon. Alternative 1 is costly, especially up front. Some of these can be phased, and so when we look at the costs, you know, some of the costs are pretty high. Just these are estimates that have been generated, so, you know, these aren't hard numbers, but as an estimate, we're really in the $60 to $90 million for each one of these alternatives, ranging from about $60 million for alternative 2 up to $86 million for alternative 3. So that's the range of cost. And like I said, most of ththese can be phased. Really, alternative 1 is the one that would be the most difficult to phase because you're pumping from the Snake River. You set it up one time, you get it up, you get it here. It's kind of a one-shot deal. So the next steps for the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee is really public involvement and feedback. That is our #1 priority. We want to know what people think. We recognize that this is going to be an enormous investment for for our communities, an enormous investment for the basin. And we want to know where people want that investment to be, and we want them to be part of the solution and help them understand, one, the nature of the problem, help them understand the work that PBAC's been doing for the last several decades to try and solve the problem, and present them with the alternatives and get some feedback. If it's not a community decision, it just won't fly, and we need this to be. This is one of those band together times. This is one of those that PBAC is such an amazing organization because we will band together as human beings who need to drink water and try and get this thing solved. So that's really the first and most critical next step is that public outreach. We're going to continue evaluating each alternative in combinations to alternatives. There are gaps. You know, we've identified these major things, but there are still a lot of data gaps that we can fill in to further refine costs and even feasibility. And so a lot of that is, you know, talking to regulatory agencies, looking at water rights, doing some preliminary engineering, taking a look and trying to refine data on the aquifer a little bit better, identifying points for potential ASR. You know, there's just a lot of data that we can fill in, and that's one of the great things about the research money that PBAC has is that we can use some of those funds to start filling in these gaps in understanding, because as we go out and talk to the public, there's going to be questions, probably questions we haven't even thought of, and so it gives us the ability to go out and then try and fill some of that data gap. So that's really what we've been up to. We're really working right now to update our communications and outreach strategy, and so we're generating a new website. You know, Corey, our executive director, she's just great. You know, and she really has a great communication background, and so we're trying to make a complicated issue understandable, and that's really our goal with our outreach. And so we're working on some branding, on a good communication plan and public involvement, and we're going to be in the middle of that. And this is our first step in that process is coming to city councils. We're going to be going to as many of these meetings as we can identify and going out and just talking to people so that they know that this is coming, and then really try and do a robust rollout so that it won't be the case as I think it currently is, that you'd probably talk to at least 7 out of 10 people and say, tell me where your water comes from. And they'd shrug their shoulders and they'd say, the tap. and that's something that we need to remedy. We need to make sure that people know where it's coming from, where it's going, and how critical it is. And with that, I'd stand for, actually, if you don't mind, Mayor.
I got a couple of questions for you. I might very well serve with Mark. We got a water summit on the 19th of October over at Schweitzer Engineering.
That's right, yes.
One of the biggest things, it's not going to be just about our community, it's about the entire Palouse. So it's going to be Moscow and Pullman, the two universities, Palouse, Colfax. Is going to be a bunch of us involved. We all know that we need an alternative water supply. That is, I mean, man, we have beat the horse to death for 30 years talking about this. Now we need to go move forward with some kind of an action plan, and it's going to cost money. So we need, in my view, we need to move forward. I'm guessing the same information we're going to see on the 19th of October over at Schweitzer.
Yeah, we are going to introduce.
Charge on that.
We are going to introduce this at the Water Summit. Corey Woodley will be discussing this at the Water Summit, so we'll introduce this. If you don't mind, Mr. Mayor, if you let me, I'd like to invite Kevin up just to say a couple words to the council.
I know who Kevin is and a bunch of us, but introduce yourself and your title from Pullman.
I'm Kevin Gardis, Public Works Director in Pullman, and good evening, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to say a few words. First of all, great presentation, Tyler, and thank you for the invite. And I want to thank the City of Moscow and the Council for its continued support of PBAC and finding a regional solution. It really is going to take all of us working together to make this happen. This is pretty complicated. These are large dollar projects. But I think we really do have the expertise to pull this off. And so I just, briefly wanted to tell you as Pullman's representative to PBAC that we're all in this together, and I want to thank you again for your support.
Thank you, Kevin. One of the things that I thought of, the city of Houston, where that Hurricane Harvey nailed them, and they had 25 trillion gallons of water dumped on that city. That's an absolute incomprehensive thing to think about. In one city, they got well over 50 inches in one storm surge. I was thinking to myself, man, we had a big hole drilled in the ground. Not only could we fill up the aquifer, but to give you an idea how much water that is, that would service New York City for 50 years. Think about that. So, isn't that an amazing thing? And so, now look, that's not going to happen in Moscow, Idaho. If we got 50 inches of rain, God, everything would be washed away and would be rock or something. But anyway, we got to get with the program on this. There's no doubt about it. So,
excellent.
We had a question from Mark. Mark, you had a. Okay.
Mark, you need to approach the mic.
Mark, come on up to the mic.
To the mic, please.
Because we're on TV. Mark, come up to the mic, and you'll have to introduce your name again, and so folks out in TV land will see you and know who the handsome cuss is talking here.
Oh, I didn't realize that was happening. Well, I'm Mark Sechrist. I just retired from the UI a couple of months ago. I had a very simple question. What kind of effect does an extraordinary snowfall have? Because I was hoping, well, that it's going to help the aquifer. To what percent would that heavy snowfall perhaps increase the aquifer, if at all?
Well, we have two of them, two aquifers. So
well, I can address that, and then if I don't do it in enough detail, I'll ask Kevin or Les to help, because I'm sure they can do more. But our aquifer, one of the challenges is the nature of the geology here. We have very thick clay layers associated with the basalt, and so recharge is slow. It takes a long time for water to migrate through our soils. There are some areas, like for example up in the Coeur d'Alene area, where there's a lot of gravel, and so it's almost immediate. It can get down there really quick. We have a very, very slow migration of water, so it's critical that we get snowpacks and that it sits there and it slowly permeates through the soil. But for us, one big snow year isn't going to have the direct and immediate impact because of the migration times and the amount that we see that just sheets off with the clays. Les, do you have anything you want to add to that? Yeah.
One thing I would suggest for anybody out there is that this water summit is going to be October 19th. Come to it, and there's some excellent presentations for folks out there that haven't been to it. That'd be a good one for you to go to, Mark. I highly recommend.
We've got some really exciting things for the summit this year. The City of Pullman and the City of Moscow have been working together on a Yscape guidebook that we're going to have introduced. We're going to be talking about some of the joint efforts on conservation. It's going to be an exciting year for the summit.
And it will be at SEL over in Pullman,
at the Schweitzer,
starting at
4 p.m., I think.
4 p.m. Yep.
Tuesday. It's an evening thing. Well, other questions for?
I have a couple questions.
Okay, Jim.
Tyler, maybe he knows the answer to this. If, on alternative one, where we're talking about pumping out of the Snake River, and the adjudication for water rights has been done on the Snake River Basin, how do we acquire water rights to take however much water we want out of the Snake River without penalizing someone that will sue us and make a water call on it in Washington or somewhere along the Columbia?
Without being a water attorney, that is one of the things that has to be looked at. The Snake River adjudication that took place was in southeast Idaho, if I'm not mistaken.
Right,
Les,
but
you
it
might
covers
wanna
the entire
step
Snake
in,
River Basin.
But there's been a preliminary look, I believe, at potential availability of water rights that leads us to believe that there may be a way to take care of that. But that's probably something that maybe Les can cover in better detail.
Les?
If I may, the Snake River Basin adjudication, as many know, was a 25-year process. Snake River covers, I think it's roughly 65-70% of the state. And so it did reach all the way up to just south of us. The part of the concepts we're looking at here with a lot of these alternatives that Tyler mentioned are looking at peak flow times in the year. So when we're talking about diversions out of the North Fork or the Snake River or even the Palouse River, South Fork, we're really looking at those times of the year when we're seeing a lot of runoff from the mountains, from the snowpack, the spring runoff, the big storm events. Those waters are the ones that typically are not utilized through water rights, because most water rights are based on an annual usage throughout the course of the year. And so you kind of have that steady demand. But in those peak conditions, you see really high volumes for 2, 3, 4 months of the year. So those are the times when we think water is available and water rights might be available to pull that excess that's coming from that spring runoff and then capture that in some fashion. And so that's where we think, even in the Snake, there may be some potential for water right availability.
And I can add just a little bit concerning water rights. During the adjudication, what they want to do is get the base of what water is being used, how much is there, and then they'll know if there's other available for additional water rights. So just because it's been adjudicated doesn't mean people would not be able to apply for future water rights. It just depends on what the supply is, and like Les explained, it depends on when you're pulling it and how it affects other senior water right holders.
Well, there's one thing for certain, we do need to solve it.
Also, since the Palouse Basin has not been adjudicated, anything we try to do could be overruled. It's kind of premature. We can select a project like the Flanagan Creek where we're collecting water, but then it could be adjudicated that we don't have a right to keep that water. So,
and that's definitely part of the filling data gaps. Is looking, as we look specifically and start to hone in, that'll be a whole process, identifying the legalities, the rights, the availability. What we don't want to do is get too far down that road, trot out a specific project, and make the decision for the community. We don't want to come out when that's all been taken care of and we've already said this is feasible, this isn't, and come out with a single solution and say, community, this is what's happening. Because the 5 times they've tried in the past to do this and it's failed, it's because that's how they've done it. They've come out with the one option that they've got so far down the road on that there's no deviating. And so we want to trot this out early and say, look, these are the options that appear to be feasible. What do you guys want to do? How do we do it? And then we'll start to refine those and define that further.
yeah, it appears that the reuse piece is one that doesn't involve any water rights, and we certainly have that available to us. And if your numbers are correct, that U of I dropped their consumption went down 60% by reuse. If we do that with Pullman, if we do that with more reuse in Moscow, then we can probably make huge progress before these other adjudications happen. We can do that less expensively
easy and available.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Catherine,
Thank you for your presentation, and to the members that have also joined you. I was just curious that for outreach, I'm sure that PBAC's done this before, so do you outreach the high schools and get middle school students?
Yeah, one of the things that we have on the agenda for our next meeting at PBAC is just a really robust effort to identify everybody we can talk to. I mean, everybody we can talk to. And so we're going to break into groups and task groups with areas that they have to cover, and we're just going to generate the best list that we can, meeting times, contact information. I'm sure we'll be reaching out to all of you for ideas. We want to talk to everybody and figure out, and so any suggestions anybody has, we're completely open to, because we really need to make this message heard as ubiquitously as possible.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thank
Excellent
you.
report. Thank you. And thank you all the folks from Pullman around that is helping with this. It's terrific.